Great to see everybody here. I know John Ruth always draws a crowd. Yes, I just heard 95. I guess I just gave away his age. So I am going to turn the program over to Joel Nafzinger. He is the executive director at the Mennonite Heritage Center in Harleyville, and he's been working there as director for the last 4 years, and he will be giving John Ruth an introduction.
Good afternoon. It's great to be here with each and every one of you today. I think we're in for a very interesting afternoon. Now, John Ruth needs very little introduction, but I'll give him a bit of it anyway. He's been a professor. He got his degree in English literature from his doctorate from Harvard University. He's been a mission worker at the Conshohocken Mission Statement. He's been a minister at Salford. He's a noted historian with many books, including The Earth is the Lord's, his narrative history of Lancaster Conference, for those of you around here. And of course, 'Twas Seeding Time, which we'll be hearing about more as well. This is his study of Mennonites in the American Revolution. And since you're here to hear him and not from me, I'll now turn it over, John.
Thank you, Joel. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Can you hear? All right. Well, I'm happy to be with you folks and pleasantly surprised to find so many of you who aren't taking your afternoon nap and interrupting it to come here. I had personal experience in Lancaster County. My parents sent me to a young Mennonite school, LMS, on the Mill Creek along Route 30, east of Lancaster. And I had 4 nice years there and made good friends. And at least one of the friends from then is here tonight. That would be Sue Burkholder. Sue, we called her Betsy Her back then in those days. My wife and I got to be friends with her and her husband, Richard Burkholder, whom we knew in New England. And through the years, he taught at Goshen College, and I taught at Eastern Baptist, or Eastern University. I was in English, and he was in theology or philosophy, I forget just what. But we're here because next year, 2026, will be 250th anniversary of 1776. And you know what happened then. Declaration of Independence and forming of a new nation. When I was a boy and going to grade school, public school, we used to sing the song, there goes my 95-year-old brain. Well, Samuel Smith wrote it, and my country, 'tis of thee. Sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. And then at the end, our fathers, God, to thee, author of liberty, to thee we sing, long may our land be bright with freedom's holy light. Protect us by thy might, great God, our King. So I was taught to love our country, and I did and still do. Now that we are a quarter of a millennium further than the forming of our separate nation, we have a perspective that we didn't have when I was a boy. Many people, many historians wrote about the American Revolution. And they generally spoke in great sweeping terms. In 1883, long before I was born, there appeared in my community in Lower Salford, in Montgomery County, a 106-page history and geography of Montgomery County by a Lower Salford author named John Harley. Here was proof that a local Pennsylvania Dutchman could speak in macrocultural terms. And he claimed in his book, "Proudly May We Remember the Events of Our Local Past." But that book, so-called History of Montgomery County, remembered nothing of our local past. What it had in its 17-page introduction was a celebration of the American Revolution, and Mr. Harley's Dunker's ancestors had taken no part in it, didn't approve of it. So one generation can have an interpretation of the past that suits its own proclivities. So everybody has their own version of the past. What is the real version? Well, I had a neighbor who his parents were members of the Salford Mennonite congregation, or his grandparents, but his father joined the Indian Creek Brethren Church. And he became the president of the Brethren Seminary out and around Chicago. When I heard that he wrote a little book called God's Story and Ours in 1974, I rejoiced. I thought, I want that book. Small book, sort of like this book that I wrote later. And I read in it that nothing of our local story at all. Nothing at all. It was a meta-narrative. It was ideas interpreting how you should interpret God's story through our story, but nothing of my lower Salford story. Well, I was much more provincial than that. I wasn't trained as a historian. By the way, when I went to college, it was because my brother-in-law, Don Jacobs, said I ought to go to college. I was a parts boy at a Ford garage, 23 years old, and Don was going to go to Africa as a missionary. How many of you knew Don? Look at that. Wow. Anyway, I was lucky to have a brother-in-law like that. There are not many people like Don Jacobs. Well, so he lent me, he said, I won't need this, I have some money. He taught at LMS. He said, you can have that money to go to college with. Do anybody here remember Paul N. Craybill? There you go. He was a hall manager. He wasn't too satisfied with my behavior in the hall at LMS, but we got together afterward. After I was a minister, that was sort of forgotten. And Don said I ought to go to college. Well, a local man told me, you have a good education. You had a year at Eastern Mennonite School, college. You got it, and now you can preach. But Don said I needed more education. So anyway, he lent me $2,000, went off to, and now where was I going to go to school? Well, Paul Crable was the father-in-law of a man with whom I shared the lot to be a minister. And Paul said to me, there's a brand new college close by here called Eastern Baptist College. Look it up. I thought, good, I'm going to go to college and I'm going to study history. So I went to this college. Well, they had one history professor, and he was younger than I was. Then we had an English professor who was very frustrated with his students, and when I handed in a few essays, he got quite excited. He said, you should be an English major. Well, okay. And then I graduated with an English major. Maybe my buddy was Tony Campolo, who you remember. He died a few months in the past year. They turned me into into an English major. And after I graduated with that, I thought, now I want to study history at the University of Pennsylvania. But the University of Pennsylvania accepted me, but no money, and we had nothing as a young mission pastor. And then all of a sudden, the Baptists got in touch with Purina Milling Company, who created this Danforth Fellowship for young Christian professors, and they sent me to Harvard. Well, I hardly knew what happened. How did that all happen? And there I went straight through to graduate work in English. Well, that wasn't hardly my calling. I taught English for about 15 years. And then it came 1975, 76, and we're going to have a 200th anniversary, 1776. And a professor from Eastern Baptist College knocked on our door, where I was living in Lower Salford, and said, "What are we Mennonites going to do for the bicentennial of 1776? Well, I said, we have to have a source book. Okay, good. But it took too long for that source book to get written. Well, in the meantime, I, like about 50% of other Mennonite young people, thought I was going to write a novel. And so I started gathering material, and then I thought, well, I'll turn that into an actual nonfiction book, and got it out just in time for the end of 1976. And that was called, now I see up there was my wife, Don Jacobs' younger sister. She designed a cover for that book. Let's see what happens when I press this. There. 'Twas Seeding Time. We got it out just in time for the end of 1976. Now, what is that about? Well, reading the records of the recruiters who came to Lancaster and York County to sign up volunteers for a military force to oppose the government, the royal government, the King Charles's government, and they said they tried to recruit some persons, but when they came to some Amish or Mennonites, they told us they could not come to Seeding Time. Well, what's the real work that we do? Planting the earth, working with, you see, and so Roma designed that with an Amishman or a Mennonite from the 1770s throwing seeds on the ground, and the recruiters going home reporting they couldn't come, it was to Seeding Time. Now, that's not that hard to grasp the idea, is it? Well, I was disappointed, frankly, when, although I was very happy when I was approached by a new publishing company out in Minnesota, that they said they wanted to bring this book out again. So I wanted that cover on there. But instead, they said, well, it's a republication, so we want a new cover. So it's okay, the cover on the new one, but it's not that one. So I have to give my wife credit for that. But anyway, this Brethren young fellow that grew up in our community became president of the Brethren Seminary out in Chicago and published a book called, with the title, God's Story and Ours. When I read it, there was no story in it. And so, though I had my graduate degrees in English, I went back to square one. And I just collected what stories there was. And that's this book. Now let me say something about the philosophy of that. There was a philosopher who named Lyotard, Jean-Francois Lyotard, who not that many years ago argued that knowledge and meaning are produced within specific discourses. Their validity derives from their relevance to particular situations, small stories, rather than from universal principles. So, here's a little book of small stories. It is not a book for a speed reader who needs to write a review. It's for somebody like an Amish preacher in Ohio who wrote me after reading it. He said, well, we only go to church every 2 weeks. Then on the Sunday we don't have church, I stay home and read. So he said he read toward seating time. And then he said, for a minister, it is always seating time. You throw out the seeds. Put your thoughts down on paper. Now you can do it on a computer. Put it down, and then your some weird great-great-grandchild of yours will wonder what you thought. And will be happy to read it. And even if it isn't very smart, like some of the stuff I put down, but if I could only have read my great-great-grandfather's and grandmother's thoughts in the Civil War, wouldn't that be interesting? But they were too busy. And not only were they too busy, it never occurred to them that I would come along and want to know what they thought. Now, in my community, we had a Lutheran pastor, highly educated. His name is Henry Melchior Muhlenberg. There was a place we call today Trap. He kept wonderful diaries. You can read those diaries and you can see what he was thinking, what he was eating, what his people said, what the houses were like. You can see everything. But what can I see when I look for the local Mennonites' thoughts then? Zilch. Thank you very much. So I decided to scrounge up whatever I could and put it in story form. So that's what you got in this book. Now, you know, next year, in the 250th anniversary, Ken Burns will put out a documentary. He's the best. And he believes in small stories that make up the big stories. And this is going to run for weeks, starting maybe in January, I don't know. When? November. Next month already, all right. And he said, people don't realize the Revolutionary War that we make such a big deal of was a civil war. The country got polarized. You ever hear of polarization? Whigs and Tories, or loyalists. Which side are you on? And that smart preacher, Henry Melchior Muhlenberg, Lutheran preacher, said, you have to watch yourself. You can't say anything. Your family gets mad, gets polarized. They don't talk to each other. You ever hear of that? That's where we are now. And don't understand each other, and how can you think that way you think? That's the way they were then. Now, most of the Mennonites, interestingly enough, were loyalists. And the bad name for that was you were a Tory. But the bad name for the other side was rebel or Whig. And it got into, not too much into Mennonite families, although it did. It got into some of them too. We had a split in our community following a minister named Christian Funk. So we had Funkites. Now, well, before we get to that, there arose in Philadelphia a group of people, mostly business people, who didn't like the way the King of England put taxes on us. Well, the King of England said, we got to have revenue to run your government. What do you expect? No, we'll run it ourselves. Thank you very much. The first thing you know, they were pulling down statues of the king in Boston. And they got really angry in Boston. And first thing you know, there was a thing called Continental Congress in Philadelphia. And they were in touch with some hot-headed guys up in Boston, Sam Adams and others like him. And they said, enough of this. We don't need kings. Ever hear of that before? No King's Day. What are kings? Good God, said Robert Penn. What are they? Whoever invented them, who needs them? We have God. We don't need kings. Use common sense, Thomas Paine said. Common sense will tell you you don't need a king. You can run your own life. Well, he had a point, and his point won the war. And but in Canada, they said, that's all right, we'll stay with the king. They don't have a bad life in Canada. They're still with the king. What's so horrible about that? And they look at us and think, oh, you people. Anyway. Now, I want you to sympathize with our foreparents having to deal with this situation. Here come guys that say, you got to pay extra tax now. And our preacher, our bishop at Salford, where I live, Andrew Ziegler, said, well, paying tax to whom? Well, he said, I'd as soon go, it's the same as going to war. Paying tax to a rebel government? Didn't we give our word to the king? Didn't we say we'd be loyal? Didn't we even sign? Our Lutheran and Reformed friends, there were no Catholics around back then where we lived, they put their hand on the Bible and they swore by God that they would be loyal to the king. And now they're going to take it back? You don't do that. In the first place, Jesus said swear not at all. And so we didn't swear, but we did promise. We can't take our word back. That went to the core of who they were. Give them a break. Don't call them bad names. They were conscientious. And most of the Mennonites felt that way. Well, history was running against that. History was bringing in the no kings thing, a free country, liberty, and justice for all. And we will write our own constitution. Thank you very much. We might have to amend it for 20 times, but that's all right. We'll make our own. We'll define our way. So one of the things I hope in reading these small stories strung together is that you will sympathize with what they went through. Now, most of the illustrations are from my community, but I have Lancaster stuff in it too. Now, this book, coming out again after 50 years, I said, if you put it out again, I will write a new chapter for it. And in it, I learned a couple of things in the last 50 years that would have been nice to have in the book. Now I have a chance to put them in. So that last chapter is, what do I call it here? Let's see. I call it Which Weapons, Which Story? And what I do is I tell the story of a Hessian soldier. Now, the King of England needed soldiers to fight against the rebels in America, and so he basically bought the services of German young men from Hessen mostly, not on, but most of them, and the nickname was Hessian soldiers. Well, they had nothing against Americans that they fought against, but they brought their muskets and their bayonets over here, and they got paid. You needed some of them. For instance, there was a young fellow trained as a blacksmith who wound up in our community. Well, these Hessian soldiers, when they got over here, they fought with their bayonets. They were bloody, and they were considered really bad by the people that didn't agree with them. They found a lot of people in Pennsylvania talking their vernacular. They felt at home. The food and the talk, it was German. And they sort of liked it. And after the war was over, they had fought against the Americans, but they decided to stay here, a bunch of them. And including was a man named Henry Bruchtiser, who came to our community, but you had him out here in Lancaster County. How many remember Stoner Crady? There you go. Well, Crady is a Hessian soldier, like Christian Stringer and Mr. Alstorff, and they wound up in Mennonite schools. And these Hessian soldiers. And one joined our church at Salford, and he was the first teacher we knew since we had Christopher Dock. And I found fractures that he wrote, and I put one or two or three of them in here, and they're in color. They put them in the back here. You might find it a little boring, but there's always somebody who's interested in details, I find. And so that's in the book here. And I tell his story. That's one of the threads in the extra chapter, plus the story as remembered by a woman who lived near the Mennonites, where George Washington stayed with his troops before and after the Battle of Germantown in 1777, October 3. So that gave me some extra stuff. Now, I'm warning you, if you read the book too fast, it'll get away from you. You almost have to think, now, where's this and where's that? And I tried to put in there so you could tell where you were in time and so forth. Now, let's see. When I talked about this book the other month at Souderton, old people, we used to call it the old people's home. We don't talk like that anymore. See, what do we call it? Community or something like that. Anyway, I showed pictures. And Joe Nostiger brought those pictures along, and I'm going to see if there's something interesting that we can look at while I'm talking about this book. Afterward, you have a chance to get the book if you want it. Some of you already did it, and I'll sign your book if you want me to. Let's see what comes up here. Oh, that's Continental Congress in Philadelphia. And our people said, what's that? Who elected them? Did God? My wife made that proctor for 1976. Let's see, she started in her proctor in 1974. Inspired by Roland Yoder. Are you here, Roland? I met him before Anyway, Roland lives here now. He was the art teacher at Christopher Dock. Oh, yeah. Hi, Roland. Anyway, so he was our inspiration on that. I remember when I think, Roland, I suggested to you that you could do a diploma, and you bought into that, and we went down to the Art Museum in Philadelphia. No, it was the principal. What was his first name? Who? No, the Yoder after him. Who? Well, my hearing is so poor that... No, not Paul Miller. Yoder, for years. He was a principal at CD. Then he went to Virginia. His wife's name was, no, your wife's name was Dottie. Well, anyway, here we are. He was from the Big Valley, and his wife was from New York. Lee, that's it. Lee Yoder and I went to the Philadelphia Art Museum, and we got ideas. We looked at the frock tour there, and we talked to Roland, and Roland did maybe I even might have it here, I don't know. But in any case, that statement that you see up on the screen was the response of the main leader of the Lancaster Mennonites, Benjamin Hershey. And he wrote, I can't read it now, but we have dedicated ourselves, he said, to help in every way that can help men's lives. But we have no freedom in our conscience to do anything which hurts or destroys men's lives. That's eloquent language. And that was published in a broadside. And then my wife, Roma, used frock tour to express that. That's Henry Muhlenberg's church at Trapp, the Lutheran man that had that good diary. And that is the home of the colonel, Daniel Heister, who was in charge of the recruiting of men in my community. In Franconia and Lower Salford and Skippack and so on, Daniel Heister, and he collected big money because the Mennonites and the Brethren would not go to drill, to practice marching, so their fines was big money, and Daniel Heister collected it. That woman there is living in she restored Daniel Heister's house, and she has a picture of standing there with a painting of Henry Melchior or Muhlenberg. There you see them up in Boston pulling the king down. That is at Trenton, New Jersey, and it has George Washington on top of that thing, looking back toward the Delaware River, because George Washington surprised the British troops on Christmas Eve, 1776. Do you remember that? He went across the Delaware and scared them, and that monument remembers that. There are people reenacting the Hessians, dressing like Hessians today yet. There's another example, a drawing of Hessian soldiers. That's the battle, I think, of Brandywine. When the British went down along the Delaware, the Atlantic coast and came up the Chesapeake Bay, when they landed in Maryland, they had a battle at Brandywine. And here in Lancaster County, in the Earls, East and West Earl, you could hear the booming of the cannon. So could we, back in what became Montgomery County from there. They kept their powder in the horns from the oxen, you know. They had a battle after the Battle of Brandywine where it rained so hard that everybody's powder got wet and they couldn't fight, so they all quit, called the Battle of the Clouds. Washington came up to this area, that's in where I live, and came to a mill property which was owned by a Mennonite man named Sam Pennypacker. And that is old Muhlenberg's son, who became a Whig. He became one of Washington's sub-generals. The man living in that came to our church, and he would not sell his produce to the Americans for paper money, but he sold it to the British for hard cash. And a bullet was shot through that house as he was eating supper, and from then on he sold produce to the Americans too. Here at this house, Hans Ulrich Berge, 1732, in 1777, came a British spy, sneaked up from Philadelphia to that house where the Burgies lived. Now, the Burgies had been arrested, their grandfather, already in Bern, Switzerland, for feeding spies. And so this was only 2 miles from where Washington was sleeping. And the Americans got a hold of Christian Burgi, who had got the farm there, and gave him the scare of his life. And they let him go. From then on, he promised to sell to the Americans as well as the British. After the Battle of Germantown, October 3, 1777, so many Americans were killed. They are buried up near Schwenksville, Pennsylvania, with unmarked graves. They're just little stones. And our local people totally forgot about that. In the Towamencin, in Jacob Gottschall's congregation, where there was no meeting house, Washington buried one of his generals who bled to death in a Mennonite home and buried him there. And Nashville, Tennessee is named for him. When the people from Nashville came to the Towamencin Mennonite congregation and begged to take his bones back to Nashville, the pacifist Mennonite congregation at Towamencin, Jacob Gottschall's farm, refused, and they kept his bones, even though, because he was buried. Washington had his cannon boomed when General Nash was buried there. Well, on this farm, Washington's troops stayed. They stayed at the home of Frederick Wambold in 1755. His barn was built. It's not there anymore, but I was allowed to take a picture of it. And there's a Mennonite minister with a cannonball found there near where my wife and I live now at Dock Acres. Washington stayed there. Then they hanged a man close by there who was considered a Tory. And they took a Mennonite man who kept on selling eggs in Philadelphia when he wasn't supposed to, when the British were there. They tied him to a tree and threw all his eggs at him. From then on, he didn't go to market anymore in Philadelphia. I don't have time to tell the story of this Bible. I think, well, maybe I will. You see that circle on the left-hand side? That was drawn in 1708. Then he died. It says in there, this Bible belongs to Matthias Schnabele on the Ebersheimer Hof, and it is dear to him. Well, he died, and his widow married a Culp, and that Culp became the minister at my church in Salford, Tillman Culp Jr., and he came with his wife, with Matthias's widow, to Salford, had a farm near Lead Rock. And his son, they had one child, and she married a Lutheran who became our bishop, Andrew Ziegler. Well, anyway, this Bible was brought over by other members of the family, the Bachmans, up at Saucon. In the polarization that happened, people got so angry, the local officer up around Saucon was going to get even with those Mennonites. And he basically took the law to its end. You know, you can apply the law softly or you can put your teeth in. He got that congregation's properties all sold at auction, including the stoves bolted to the floor, including the Bible. Well, before the revolution was fully over, the Bachman family got that Bible back. And they got a Lutheran, probably a Hessian, to put their family roster in there. That Bible wound up in Philadelphia, and the people who had it didn't know what it was. And they got it into the hands of a dealer who was going to put it on auction. And so first they cut out the family roster, but they left this in so they could sell it separately and get more money. You know, sometimes people's heritage is only the money they can get out of it. Our people nickel and dimed our Proctor away for 50 years before people with a feeling of soul got it and started collecting it for their soul reasons, S-O-U-L. Anyway, that Bible came back to us in the 1990s, I guess, and we pieced a picture of it together again, and now we are happy to have it in the Mennonite Heritage Center. The man that the Mennonites got to put their family roster in it was Hans Adam Meyer, a Lutheran, and he drew this picture of a Hessian soldier. But he also drew this picture of a schoolmaster, a Schuldiener, and it was a Hessian soldier becoming a schoolmaster who showed up at Salford and married a teenage Salford girl and had two daughters. Then he died real quick. But he did Proctor. He learned Proctor, and like Christopher Dock, he gave out little rewards and writing samples. Hans Adam Meyer taught in Mennonite schools. There's Henry Huntsberger's hymn tune book over the best known hymns in the Marburger Songbook. Now that's Lutheran. Well, Meyer was Lutheran. So the Mennonites had Lutheran hymns in their school books, and they learned them, and we wanted more Lutheran songs than you Lancaster people wanted in yours, and when it came time to put together a hymn book in 1803 and 4, we stuck with so many Lutheran songs, but the Lancaster didn't have as many. They had some, but they wanted more of the Ausbund, the Amish one. And so we had two separate hymn books. Well, anyway, here is Hans Adam Meyer doing the Mennonite, the Bachman family. For the Bachmans there, you can see. I can't see it well enough, but, well, in the Proctor tradition, you have symmetry. And you have ornamental calligraphy. But on these writing samples, the Vorschriften, writing sample, you have the ornate calligraphy, and then you have the ordinary calligraphy for the pupil to learn. And at the bottom, you will have the alphabet and the numerals. And very rarely, you will have the signature of the one that did it. Luckily, Henry Brocktiser signed his, and the date. And then you can piece the story together. This was what Henry Brocktiser did for Mary Alderfer, the neighbor of really, I guess, where I live, on our farm even. In Lower Salford Township, you notice how he spells Lower Salford? He's a Hessian soldier. And he takes the symmetry from the Proctor tradition, but he varies the color, which is a delightful thing. Well, when my wife, following Roland Yoder, got into Proctor, she fell in love, and the Proctor tradition found her and used her. She didn't know what she was doing, but she made over 900 pieces till she was done. There's Henry Brocktiser, a little reward he gave out. Ein braver Schüler in singing, a good scholar in singing for Anna Alderfer. And then he made this piece. Daran wird jedermann erkennen, dass ihr meine Jünger seid, wenn ihr lieb füreinander haben. Thereby will everyone know that you are my disciples if you have love one for another. Here is this Hessian soldier came over with a bayonet, winding up with a goose quill at Salford, doing something better than the Salford people themselves can do and doing it for them. And he wrote that for the grandson of one of Washington's generals. And in that D, daran, are scripture verses. Let's see if I get closer. I don't know if I do. Yeah. In the snake, a snake and a bird. And in the snake it says, be as wise as a serpent. And what does it say in the bird? As wise, as harmless as doves. Look at that creativity. That was a gift given by a Hessian soldier to us Mennonites. He took the place, Christopher Dock died in 1771. He did this piece in 1784, I think, or 5 or something like that. Then he died soon after. And here is that a man using that D, but without the extra verse, a Hessian soldier in Lancaster County. And there's a school teacher. In the Mennonite church, we split. We had a small group who said, go ahead and sign that oath. It doesn't mean anything anyhow. Oh, no, said the majority. We don't sign any oath, and furthermore, we don't take back our promise. But this smaller group said, yes, we do. Be smart. The government's going to change anyway. Go along with the new government. The majority didn't. So the minority had their own little sect of funkites. They followed Christian funk, and they had 4 of those meeting houses, and one of them is left yet. Maybe that might be transported over to the grounds of the Mennonite Heritage Center, where Joel is in charge. We'll see. We're talking about it. It's left over. Nobody wants it anymore. If it does, it'll come over on the same grounds that Henry Brocktiser's beautiful Proctor is hanging in the gallery there. So I closed my book, my second edition here, the reissue, with the thought that looking at the simplicity of that meeting house with its mixed message and the ornateness of the Proctor of this gift of this Hessian soldier, provoke thought in serious people. That's how I end the book. Thank you. Now, maybe we have time for a couple of questions. Should we?
I have the mic here. If you have a question, I have the mic here.
If anybody has a question, you can ask it.
Okay. Anyone have a question or comment?
And if not,
Raise your
fine.
hand. Yes, Agnes?
Hello, John. I'm Agnes Hacker, Ray's widow. And did you hear? Okay. Well, anyhow, that one, the Proctor that about Hershey, we had the MHEP printed out some of those and then sold them, didn't they? Yes. So we had a copy and we framed it, and then I donated it to somebody for the, I think, Fellowship Day or something. And a Hershey, a descendant, bought that Proctor that I donated. So that was thought maybe you'd be interested in that story.
All right.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, if I remember correctly, 500 copies of that were printed as a poster in 2 different colors. Some thought you don't want it so white. I like the white one, but so we printed a bunch, hundreds on darker paper because we figured it would have looked darker originally. Proctor was. Be that as it may, they're long gone. We have a copy hanging in my house, and there's one at the Heritage Center, but I don't know where all the others got to. Maybe 1,000 of them.
So I think they're still going.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
So
Okay.
I'm willing to go back there, and if anybody wants copies, I'll be happy to sign them. Don't feel you're obligated.
And you should probably go back first.
Yes.
Maybe before I dismiss everybody. How about if you go to the back? That way we won't get you stopped up here, okay? Let's
Okay.
give John a hand. Thank you so much, John. That was wonderful. Very interesting.